The financial regulatory reform bill that has passed the Congress and is becoming law is just a fantastic piece of legislation in many regards. It's heroic as it is historic. And importantly, what it will give us is an overall systemic regulatory regime. Somebody watching over these large financial institutions that folks thought were too big to fail. Well, they fell, and they fell on a lot of hardworking Americans. So we need somebody, some entity, if you will, to look over the sort of financial integrity of these large institutions. This bill does that, importantly. It's a wide-ranging piece of legislation, which is why it's fairly large and complicated, in that it reaches really every corner of our financial economy. Everything from the corporate and bank boardrooms on Wall Street to the homeowners in the heartland and every place in between. It's a really important piece of legislation. Specifically, some of the individual things it'll do that I think are really important are it will give transparency to currently dark markets. When I say dark markets, what I'm talking about is transactions that occur that are out of the purview of regulators' vision. Let me give you a quick idea of what I'm talking about. Currently, the regulated commodity exchanges, the things that the government sees, account for about $5 trillion of trading annually. $5 trillion. Yet the over-the-counter markets, these dark markets that I'm talking about, represent over $600 trillion. 5 trillion versus $600 trillion. And that $600 trillion, that can have an impact on the prices that people pay for just about everything they use. Whether or not it's a home mortgage, a gallon of gasoline, or a gallon of orange juice, these futures markets have an impact on that very directly. So it's important not just to these markets and not just to our economy, but to consumers, to ensure that they are paying a fair price. We don't dictate prices in government, but we try to ensure that these markets are free and fair, that they're devoid of fraud, abuse, and manipulation, that they operate efficiently and effectively. This legislation is going to help us do that. In addition, it gives us two other things I wanted to mention. One is it will impose position limits on traders. What I mean by position limits are it will put a cap on the amount that an individual trader can hold. The problem, in my view, what's happened in the last several years is that these positions have become so large that they may have been able to contort markets because the concentration of an individual's large positions, whether or not it's 10, 20, or more % of a market, that could sway the market, and we don't want that. Like I said, we want efficient and effective markets. This legislation will impose these position limits. The agency, the CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, where we are now, we will impose the actual levels of those positions. But it's not a question, as it was before this bill became law, as to whether or not we will do that. They will be imposed. They will be imposed. And the last thing I wanted to mention is something that they call disruptive trading practices. It's hard to believe when I tell people that our manipulation standard is broken, but it is. And when I say manipulation standard, what I'm talking about is going after folks who try to push around these markets, make a buck for themselves or their company. We've only had one single successful prosecution in 35 years. A dismal record, but that's true. So the law is broken, and this bill fixes it. It gives us the authority to go after manipulation and manipulation-like practices, these disruptive trading practices. It'll allow us to put folks in jail, it'll allow us to fine them, and it'll make these markets operate in a better way. As I say, not just for the economy, but for consumers. So overall, I really thank the members of Congress who had the foresight in moving forward with this legislation, some as early as 2 years ago, and in particular, President Obama, who came out of the gates strong on this right after he was inaugurated, took a personal interest in the idea that we need to pass this legislation. What he said, his clarion call for this legislation was, after the economic calamity we've had, after letting some run roughshod, over these markets for years, a decade of deregulation, all the way back since 1999 with the deregulation of the Glass-Steagall Act. He said, we can't continue the way we have. Status quo is unacceptable. And what this legislation does is it puts sideboards on the free market. Everybody wants a free market, but we certainly don't want these wild and exotic mortgages that were taking place all over the country, led to the collapse of AIG, Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, and it was the folks like you that took money out of their pockets and had to pay in the form of this bailout. We won't have to do that again because of this bill. It's an important piece of legislation. I'm pleased to support it and thank everybody who worked on it. Thanks very much.